Okay, Dr. Wilcox. So, why is it so hard for people who have ADHD to maintain goal directed type behavior?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the primary reason is due to executive functioning deficits, which allow us to plan, prioritize, organize, um, start tasks, time management. So, all of these things go into goal directed behavior. So, individuals with ADHD struggle with executive functioning skills. So they have trouble with goal directed behavior. So one of the keys for
Mhm.
them is to, develop a planning system, one that they'll be able to stick to and use every day. And that will help, with goal directed behavior.
Got it. Okay, so why are, these functions of like time management, planning, and like organization, why is it hard though? Like, what about the person with ADHD makes it difficult for them to kind of, I guess, do well in these tasks naturally?
Sure. Well, ADHD is rooted in neurobiology. So,
Hmm.
executive functions are actually controlled by the frontal cortex. So, the frontal cortex integrates information from different parts of the brain and allows for higher cognitive processes like planning, prioritization, organization, time management, all those things. So, you can kind of think of it like a conductor. So, a conductor has the ability to take sounds from different instruments and integrate all of those sounds and produce a beautiful music piece, right? So that's kind of what the frontal cortex is doing in your brain. And so in ADHD, the brain isn't processing and storing information correctly, and that's leading to these deficits in executive functioning skills.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. Now, is there like a difference between ADHD, versus like ADD, or is it pretty much the same thing?
Well, everything today is called ADHD, but
Yeah.
there's different subtypes of ADHD. So there's primarily hyperactive type, which is not very common, where kids are just, exhibit the hyperactivity, the impulsivity. There's primarily inattentive type, which is actually the type that my son has, which you have trouble with the executive function skills, but you don't necessarily have the hyperactivity and the impulsivity outwardly affecting others. It's more of an internal, you can have internal hyperactivity and impulsivity, but it's not outward behavior like you think of ADHD is, the boy running around the classroom, bouncing off the walls, can't sit still, interrupting, when the teacher is talking, those types of things. So that's inattentive subtype doesn't have those components. And
Okay.
then there's
Got it.
combined type, which is actually the most diagnosed type, which is the inattentive piece. So, trouble focusing, paying attention, trouble with organization, and things like that. And also the hyperactivity and the impulsivity, the outward behavior.
Got it. Okay, so I guess that's what they would, I guess, call in the past, like ADD, right? But like now, pretty much everything is called ADHD. Is that correct?
Yeah, everything is ADHD.
Yeah.
ADD would have been inattentive type.
Yeah.
ADHD would have been the combined type.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Because for me personally, like I got, diagnosed with like ADD, right?
Yes.
So like that was always a bit of a, slight confusion because people are like, what's the difference, right? Because people always use it back and forth as if they're the same term, right? But I
Yeah,
guess,
they do.
it's just kind of interchangeable, but like now they all call it, strictly ADHD, but that tends to be, I guess, more rare if you're extremely hyperactive and like overly impulsive and stuff like that, right? Which is, I guess, not as common. So,
Well,
mhm.
okay. So
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
the hyperactivity, so the combined type, which has the inattentive piece and the hyperactive piece, that's actually the one that's diagnosed the most because think of
Mm.
it like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So the kid that is disruptive in the classroom and um, you know. Uh, constantly getting up and moving around and things like that, well, that kid's going to get noticed by the teachers, right? And the teacher is going to go to the parent and say, your child's exhibiting these behaviors in the classroom. And those are the kids that are most often going to get diagnosed. kids who have inattentive type or ADD, which,
Hmm.
those are the kids that kind of fly under the radar because those are the kids that are
Yeah.
shoving worksheets in their backpack and, not completing their work, getting up and disappearing during class for, a half hour because they're avoiding doing a task in the classroom that they don't want to be doing. Like my son used to get up and disappear during English class because that was his worst subject. He
Yeah,
never
yeah.
liked English. He still doesn't like English, and he's a senior in college.
That's pretty
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he would get up and disappear, and I would get calls from the school nurse that, oh, Andrew came to visit me today for a half hour, because he was disappearing because he didn't want to do the work. But those
Uh-huh.
behaviors are not often recognized as ADHD because unfortunately there is still the stereotype that ADHD is hyperactive little boys.
Yeah.
Um, so my son and I actually kind of made it a mission to increase awareness of inattentive ADHD because it's underdiagnosed overall, but it's particularly underdiagnosed in boys because people don't associate boys without the hyperactivity.
Hmm. Got it. Okay. So you mentioned that, when it comes to ADHD, it's like a neurobiological
Mhm.
type condition, right? Now
Yes.
here's the thing though. Is it more genetic or is it something that's slowly developed over time? Because recently it seems like these kinds of diagnoses have been climbing quite rapidly, right? So like what's going on there? Is it like mostly genetic or is it something that is developed as time goes on based on certain behaviors?
Okay. Well, so I'm not a geneticist,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I don't, I don't like. I've read about genetics of ADHD,
Hmm.
and what I know is that yes, there is a genetic component to it, and it
Hmm.
ranges anywhere between. I've seen estimates between like 50 and 80%. Heritability. So there is definitely a genetic component to ADHD. The environment also plays a role. You can have a genetic predisposition to something,
Hmm.
and then situations in your environment can bring out those
Yeah.
behaviors. Um, so they're both at play with ADHD. Things like in terms of the environment, like if you have a child who has ADHD and they're not completing their schoolwork, mom's getting very frustrated, mom's yelling at the child, the child's yelling back at mom, they go back and forth, and then the child has a full fold out meltdown blowout. So that behavior is causing the ADHD, behaviors. But bad parenting is not, if you just have bad parenting, your child's not going to have ADHD. So does that kind of make sense? Like they have their
Got it. Yeah.
genetics are predisposing them to have the ADHD, and the behaviors are coming out because of the interaction they're having with the parents.
Got it. Okay. Now, like, what other types of situations tend to bring it out? When it comes down to your environment, like you mentioned that when you interact with your parents, like that has a component. But are there any other components that tend to bring it out, or?
Sure. So a lot of kids, actually, kids that have the inattentive subtype, these kids really aren't diagnosed until middle school, high school, or even adulthood because um, once they're placed in a situation where their demands are greater in terms of organizing and prioritizing all of those executive function skills,
Yeah.
then you see the ADHD coming out. So kids in elementary school are actually very good at compensating for their ADHD. So they can go along, not turn in homework assignments, and get 100 on the test and get an A in the class. They're good at compensating. Once they get
Uh-huh.
into middle school and okay, well now you're changing classes, you have multiple teachers, your teacher wants you to be more independent and more responsible for, what you're doing. Well, that's when the ADHD really starts coming out, or it can get worse. Like in my son's case, he was diagnosed when he was in third grade, but when he got to middle school, he started having trouble again because the demands on him were much greater.
Okay. Okay. Now, do you think, like social media has any role in this with like the style of content that, these younger kids are constantly consuming, like 5-second videos, 8-second videos that are meant to constantly keep you engaged? Like, do you think that has a role, or is that just not relevant?
I haven't done too much reading on that or research on it, so I
No
probably
problem.
really can't comment, make any big comments about that. I can say
No
that,
problem.
kids with ADHD do gravitate towards, like fast paced video games and things like that.
Hmm.
Because it moves quick. They don't want to sit there and have something long and drawn out, so it moves quickly. There's also challenging situations that they have to get out of. So kids with ADHD are really, really good at that. They think quick on their feet, and they're good at handling challenging situations. So, and things in the game are constantly changing. So it's very
Mm.
appealing to kids with ADHD.
Got it. Okay. Okay, great. Now, something else that you mentioned, which I think is, really important, is that people with, you know, this diagnosis, they don't like goals or tasks that have ambiguity,
Mhm.
right? So, why exactly is that?
Well, because tasks that have ambiguity and aren't clear can cause overwhelm and anxiety and eventual shutdown. Because
Mm.
again, it goes back to those executive function skills, right? So
Yeah.
they don't know how to start the task, they don't know how to plan it out, they don't know how to break it down into smaller pieces if it's too much, right? So I like to give the example when my son was little. If I said to my son, go clean your room, he would go upstairs, but then I would go up there, maybe 15, 20 minutes later, and he's sitting on the floor playing with something he found, right? So he would attempt to start doing it and then find
Yeah.
something, become distracted, play with whatever. Um, so I had to learn that if I had to say to him, make your bed, put your clothes in the hamper, and clean the papers off your desk. Three very distinct tasks that he knew how to do because he had done them before. So it was very easy for him to do those three distinct tasks and, then and be able to clean up his room. But clean up your room, I don't know where to start. His room was always a mess. Where do I start? Where do things go? And it's too much because they think about the whole task, and it's difficult to break it down into those small pieces and do one piece at a time in order to progress to complete the task. So tasks that are ambiguous, another thing would be, if your child has homework, math
Mm.
homework, so that task can be rather ambiguous because, well, maybe they didn't hear the instructions that the teacher said when they were in class. Maybe they don't know where to get help if they're struggling with the questions. Maybe they don't know how much time it's going to take. So all of these things lead to, the overwhelm and the eventual shutdown and not completing the task.
Got it. That's pretty interesting. Okay, so like, yeah, it's just like your brain doesn't really like respond well to tasks that aren't clear, right? If it's,
Yeah.
kind of abstract, like you don't really know where to start, and you just,
Yes.
again,
Yep.
like you just like, shut down, right? So
Yes.
yeah, that's really important because, you talk about the way to solve this is about being more clear and having more clarity, right?
Mhm.
So can we talk about like, I guess different ways that people can actually apply this concept, for example, when it comes to life goals? Because again, if you don't know how to actually apply this in a way that moves you forward in life, then you'll just sit there and do nothing, right? Because you're not going to know where to start. So how do you apply this like concept of being clear and making everything I guess task oriented, like in terms of knowing exactly what you have to do? How do you break this down in different areas of your life, starting with like goal setting for like long-term stuff?
Right. So, like having so some long-term stuff is difficult for individuals with ADHD. They have to kind
Mm.
of narrow it down a little bit to, set smaller goals that can eventually get to that bigger goal, but setting smaller goals and having a timeline for those smaller goals. So key for individuals with ADHD is a planning system. And it's, in it, it's a planning system that works for you and that you can use all of the time, because ADHD likes the new shiny. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
when it's not shiny anymore, they don't like it or use
Mm-hmm,
it.
mm-hmm.
So
Uh-huh.
it could be anything. It could be like Google Calendar is great because it goes between like the phone and the computer and that type of stuff. But it could also be writing something in the notes on your notes app on your phone, or writing it on a pad, or using a whiteboard. So establishing some sort of planning system to help you break down the task is key. And setting things like how long things are going to take, because individuals with ADHD struggle with time management. So kind of how long do I think this is going to take? Okay, I'm going to note that, and then when I complete the task, well, how long did it actually take me? So that helps with things like planning and prioritizing, right? Because now well, this task is going to take me 45 minutes when I really think it's going to take 15, but I did it before and it took me 45 minutes. So now that helps with planning, right? So people that are procrastinators, which ADHD individuals like to procrastinate. um,
Yeah, yeah.
so, setting, artificial end dates for things, break the task down and then you set artificial end dates so that, okay, well, I'm going to do this on Tuesday and I'm making it due Friday, and, getting it done before, the timeline ends. So things like that are, helpful. And if you practice these skills every day, eventually, you'll be able to get to the end goal, to the big end goal.
Okay, great. Now, why is it, I guess, not as effective for most people who, I guess, try to break it down when it comes down to long-term goals? Because obviously, it's going to be different for each individual, right?
Mhm.
But like in general, why is it difficult, for the long term? Is it just because it's too far away, so there's not enough like urgency? Like, what makes the long term not as effective?
Yeah, that's part of it. So individuals with ADHD tend to live in the here and now. Like there's
Hmm.
no
Interesting.
future, there's no past. It's right here, right now. So,
Hmm.
and also, if you can set, a long-term goal, but you have to decide whether or not that long-term goal um, is motivating you and getting you to take action, or if that long-term goal is something that's causing you anxiety, because how am I ever going to reach that
Yeah.
goal, right? Because that can also be part of ADHD. Like, this is too lofty, I'm never going to get there. They have a lot of negative self-talk. I'm not good enough, I can't do it. So setting small things along the way where you can see your successes will enable you to keep going and realize, yes, I can do it. I am successful. I did this, this part of this task, and I should reward myself for that so that I can keep going. There's also one thing I want to bring up is there's a difference between activation and motivation. So individuals with ADHD are motivated to do things and get things done. They want to complete that task. And most of the time, they know how to complete that task. It's the activation piece. So, how do you get yourself to take action to actually take the steps to reach the goal? So
Got it.
that's what you have to figure out. What activates you? Um,
Got it.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
is
Yeah,
it?
we'll talk about that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's important. Yeah. So here's the thing, though. When it comes down to like breaking tasks and kind of setting timelines and stuff like that, and setting certain times to go and do certain things, how do you make sure that you're not kind of crossing the line and becoming too structured, right? Because if it's too structured, then people with ADHD don't tend to like that either, right?
Yeah.
Because like they want a bit of freedom, they want to, I guess, have some mental novelty, move, like in a swift way. So how do you not cross the line and become overly structured?
Yeah, and that can be a problem, especially for individuals who are perfectionists. There are, individuals with ADHD who are perfectionists, and they get bogged down in the small details and the minutia and everything, and making sure everything is just perfect. And that can be, that can cause you to kind of, um, stop as well and just not move forward. And ADHD it's a lot of trial and error. So you have to
Mm.
find something that works for you that you can stick with. So you may try something and it may be too much because you're breaking down something way too much. And then you can say, okay, well, maybe I don't need to break it down that much. Maybe I can do a little bit more generalization type things. But, it is a lot of trial and error. So if something doesn't work, you may have to try something else to see if that is better for you. So like going back to using a planning system, some people like to put everything in there. Students want to put every homework assignment, every test, every exam, every errand they have to run, every doctor's appointment. But some individuals don't need that. Where do I struggle most? So
Hmm.
that's kind of how you should be breaking it down, and what you should be focusing on is where you struggle most. Like if I don't have trouble remembering that, I have to make a haircut appointment, well, I don't really need to put that on my calendar,
Yeah.
because that's also can be overwhelming. If there's so many things, right, that can also be very overwhelming. So yeah, it's a lot of trial and error and figuring out what works for you, and not being afraid to try different things, and not worrying about how other people do it. That's also a big thing. It doesn't matter how somebody else plans out their time, or that somebody else can get stuff done without, putting all of the steps on a calendar or writing them down or making a to-do list. So, you have to do it the way it works for you and create your own best environment.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So again, it comes down to like trial and error, right? Because like you're
Yeah.
never gonna actually know, um, how your body reacts if you haven't tried multiple
Right.
different things, and just how your mind tends to react to certain things, right? Because again, like you have to figure out ways to activate, your mind, and
Yeah.
what tends to move you forward. So
Yes.
speaking of activation, this leads to something else that you talk about, which again is really important, which is the concept of dopamine, right?
Hmm.
So why do ADHD brains have such a constant need for like dopamine surges? Because this is probably one of the main things that I guess causes certain types of behavior, right? So like why do they have such a need for like constant dopamine surges?
Right. So, like we talked about before, ADHD is rooted in neurobiology, right? So, and one of the neurotransmitters in the brain that's affected is dopamine. So, so they're seeking that dopamine surge to bring dopamine levels back, to a normal level, so that they can focus and pay attention and all those things. So there's studies that have been done that show that exercise is very good for individuals with ADHD. Like if they have
Hmm.
some tasks where they need to focus, go take a run before it, go take a walk, go ride your bicycle, go outside, because all of those things will increase dopamine, and then when you come back you're able to sit down and focus on those things, on what you need to do, because now you have that elevation in dopamine, because dopamine is important for paying attention, for helping you maintain attention. So they do seek to do things that will increase dopamine. Some individuals do that by risk taking behavior. So some if you read about risk taking in ADHD, you'll see a lot of things like, well, they like to drive fast. um,
Yeah.
you know, uh, there's also problems with substance abuse with ADHD, because they're trying to bring those dopamine levels up with,
Hmm.
alcohol or other drugs. Um, so they engage in activities where they get that surge of dopamine, and then those activities are then positive for them. They're activities that they like and they're able to do and they're able to maintain their focus on.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So that's pretty interesting. So it seems like I guess just like they're baseline level of dopamine tends to be a bit lower than
Mhm.
the average, right? So they're constantly, trying to bring it up just on a
Seeking
natural level.
to raise it up.
Yeah. So constant stimulation. So yeah, this is pretty interesting because again, if you have a low baseline level when it comes down to dopamine, then you have, like a tendency to kind of go towards being negative, right? Because, like if your dopamine levels are low, like you just don't feel good. Now, this is pretty interesting. Like, is it possible to have like a high baseline level when it comes to dopamine, but have ADHD, or is that just not a thing?
I haven't seen anything like that in the scientific literature. Again, that I don't study that, so I can't speak to it 100%, but I have not seen anything that suggests that you have higher levels of dopamine and you have ADHD.
Okay, this is pretty interesting because, like, I mean, like I guess for me, right? Because what you're talking about, like I relate to it 100, like constant risk taking, constant novelty. Like I need that, right? But at the
Yes.
same time, though, I don't really have a tendency to fall into negativity, right? But I do know that people, I mean, like many people who have ADHD, like they talk about that, right? Like they tend to fall into negativity because without that stimulation, they don't really know. I guess their mind doesn't respond well to that, right? So like I was just a bit confused there, but I guess this falls back into the other thing that you're talking about, separating hyperactivity from like just being inattentive. Like, is that the main difference?
Well, so you're mentioning negativity. So, are you meaning like negative self talk?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like
So, a
feeling down
lot,
on yourself, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. So, I think a lot of that stems from individuals with ADHD. They a lot of times, most of the time, they get singled out for things they can't do, not for things that they're good at and that they can do. Right. So,
Yeah.
there was
Noted.
a study, a while back that kids in elementary school receive as many as like, or kids with like ADHD can receive as many as like 10,000 corrections for their behavior in a short span of time. I mean, so
Yeah.
there nobody really acknowledges what they can do, so they do have a lot of negative self-talk, rumination, and that's where that stems from, like that feeling of I can't do it, I'm not good at it. They also have what's known as a fixed mindset as opposed to a growth
Mm,
mindset. So the fixed mindset is um, I I can't do this. I'm not good at it. Therefore, I'm not even going to try to do it. Whereas a growth mindset is how do I learn from the previous experience and how do I do better next time? Like individuals with ADHD can be very black and white. I'm good at it or I'm not. And if I'm not good at it, I'm not even going to try it. But
that's
you
interesting.
can foster a growth mindset in them by helping to bolster, like executive function skills. You can start to create a growth mindset, and also, like we were kind of saying before, if you're setting goals, set smaller goals along the way and acknowledge when you complete a goal that you've set out to do and reward yourself. So that's
Hmm.
goes it is helpful for going from a fixed mindset into a growth, more of a growth mindset.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So because they're, I guess, constantly being corrected or being told that what they're doing is not right and they're just
Mhm.
not behaving in the right way. So just that constant,
Yes.
like I guess negative feedback loop, gets
Yes.
them to feel down on themselves, right? And this is
Yes.
extremely, I guess, hurtful when they're younger because they don't really have much life experience. So they build their confidence based off of, all this feedback, right?
Hmm.
And that leads to a fixed mindset because as a kid, if you've never had any, I guess, wins, you don't really
Hmm.
think that you can improve, right? Because I guess
Exactly.
your growth mindset comes from having a foundation of self confidence as a
Yes.
kid, to be honest, right? And a lot of that
Yes.
has to do with sport. I think this is why sports are so important because like in that kind of a situation or like an environment, you're going to constantly get good feedback with these kind of tendencies because it helps a lot if you know how to channel it properly. But like I guess sports gives you that foundation of wins, which leads to that growth mindset, right? Because you have that foundation of confidence. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, so it's the feedback loop, and that leads to rumination. Okay,
Yes.
so
Is
yeah,
what
so
that's mostly
mhm.
what's causing the negative self talk, is that they've heard. most of their lives that they're not good at stuff. You can't do it. Why can't you,
There we
but
go.
you should just study more and then you'd get good grades, but things like that don't work for individuals with ADHD because they just can't sit down and study more. It's not possible for them to do that. They have to develop
Yeah.
ways to be able to do that, which goes back to
Yeah.
the executive function skills.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because even for me, like when I read, I can't really. I mean, I can, but it's not like the most favorable for me to sit down and read. Like I like to walk around and read out
Yes.
loud too, because it's like you
Yeah.
feel like you're
Yes.
involved. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So yeah, this is pretty interesting because spinning off this, now obviously we've been talking about the challenges that come with having ADHD, right?
Mhm.
So let's spin off this and talk about some of the strengths, right? Because I think that's really important. So speaking of strengths, like what are the unique strengths that people with ADHD tend to have?
Yeah, no, that's great. I love talking about strengths and bringing,
Mm-hmm.
shedding a light on that because, like we were talking about, they don't, people with ADHD don't get acknowledged for what they
Yeah.
can do. So like, yeah, creativity and outside the box thinking are probably like two of the biggest strengths that individuals with ADHD have, right? So their
Mm-hmm.
brains don't weed out irrelevant information that's coming in so that they can pay attention to what they're supposed to be paying attention to at any
Yeah.
given time. But because their brains don't weed out that irrelevant information, they're able to make connections between things that a neurotypical brain wouldn't be able to do. There's, several entrepreneurs have, I said that they have ADHD, and their ADHD is what made them successful because they were outside the box thinkers. They weren't afraid to take chances. I think, we talked about risk taking being something that's bad, but risk taking, I think, is something that's also a positive because I think individuals with ADHD really live life. My
Mm-hmm.
son went to college and had never ice skated before and decided he was going to play ice hockey. So he put on some skates, got out on the ice,
Yeah.
wasn't afraid to do it, didn't overthink it. Yep, just going to go out there and skate. And now, he has all the gear and he plays pickup games for ice hockey.
Mm-hmm.
So he used to sit there and take computers apart and fix laptops and just, all right, I'm just going to take it apart and see what happens. And, not
Mm-hmm.
worried about, how am I going to put this back together? And is it going to work? And, should I really be doing this? And, and that's actually something that I admire most about him is that he's a
Mm-hmm.
risk taker. He just kind of jumps in and does it. So he'll have way more experiences in life than I ever had because he's not afraid to just go do it. Now, of course, sometimes,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah, you have to be
think about
careful.
the
It's a fine line.
consequences,
Yeah.
which is,
Yeah.
can be bad, but,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, so like risk taking can be something that's good, thinking quick on their feet like we talked about with playing the video games,
Yeah.
just the ability to be calm in a chaotic situation and think quick on their feet,
Yeah. That's
they're
pretty interesting. Mm-hmm.
they're individuals with ADHD are excellent at doing that.
Yeah, that's so interesting because like you wouldn't think that people with ADHD tend to, I guess, naturally fall into a state of, I guess, being calm in chaos,
Yeah.
right? Like you'd think it's the opposite, right? But
Yes.
it's really interesting how that works.
Yes, but they're able to kind of um, my son goes to school in Florida, and they
Yeah.
had a hurricane was coming, and there was the initial panic of what do I do? There's a hurricane coming, what's going to happen? But then the next day he's like, okay, getting his friends together and his buddy with the car because they were freshmen. So only his one buddy had a car. Let's go to the store. Let's get stuff that, we don't have to put in the refrigerator. Let's make sure all of our stuff is charged. Like he kind of took charge and got, everybody together because, the hurricane was coming. So, so they do, they are good in challenging situations and chaotic situations. So
Yeah. So like, is that because, I mean, when there's chaos going on, right? Like there's going to be a lot of, I guess, mental stimulation happening.
yeah,
So is it because of that? Like your brain is kind of wired for that. Like, is that why people tend to do well in that kind of a situation? Or
I would say that's a part of it
probably.
that,
Mm-hmm.
that mental stimulation and the constant, the constant buzz, the constant activity, those types of
Problem
things
solving.
are appealing to individuals with ADHD.
Yeah, and then constant problem solving too, right? Like
Yes, the
that's
constant
probably a big
problem
thing.
solving.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So that's pretty interesting. So creativity, the ability to think outside the box, taking risks, taking risks, and the ability to think on your feet, move in a swift way, and the ability to be calm in chaos, right? Like these are, huge benefits that come with having ADHD. Now, what professions and types of careers tend to be best suited with these strengths? Because obviously, if you're trying to choose a profession, you kind of want to choose something that you naturally are wired for, right? So, like in general, what professions and what activities tend to work best for these kind of individuals?
Yeah. So I would say that professions that work best is a profession that you're passionate about,
There we go.
which sounds like, well, everybody should do a profession that they're passionate about. But for
Yeah.
individuals with ADHD, this is something that's critical because if
Hmm.
they're not interested in it, they're not doing it. So,
Yeah.
parents kind of need to identify these passions in their kids when they're young and, encourage them and, foster a path forward where their kids can use these passions and, their interests. And if they end up in a career where they're doing something that they're really interested in, then they'll be successful at it. So it can really be like, I don't know if one career is better than another career for
Hmm.
individuals with ADHD, but if they're doing something that they're passionate about, then that's where they will be successful.
Got it. Okay, so like when it comes down to finding passion, like this is something obviously people talk about it all the time, right? But it can be extremely difficult, especially nowadays, because it might sound like a paradox because there's so many options. So you think, oh yeah, I can just go and do that. But like with so many options comes a lot of like confusion. Because again, with ADHD, like you don't really know where to start, right? Because it's
Mhm.
so abstract, so ambiguous. So if you had to, I guess, give people a certain sense of direction, obviously, again, it's going to be based on an individual basis. Like what components, what kind of components should they be looking for? Like, is it fast paced or flexibility? Like in general, like if you were to give them some sort of a structure and break it down into, I guess, tasks to kind of give them more clarity, how would you help them go down that path to figure out what they might be best suited for?
Yeah, one of the first things I would ask is, what do you hyper focus on?
Uh huh.
Because generally, what they can hyper focus on is generally, what they're interested in, because they can pay attention to it for an extended period of time. So what are things that spark joy that you like to, you'll watch videos on, you'll read books on, you'll be, teach yourself stuff about it. So that's
Mm-hmm.
probably a big thing, and just kind of, you know um, being self-aware, like just asking the question, what are you interested in, what are you excited about, um, and creating that self-awareness about what you're good at, asking questions about what are you good at doing. Um, you know everybody has things that they're good at doing, so what are you good at
Mm-hmm.
doing, what do you like to do, kind of asking those kind of questions and increasing that self-awareness will kind of help, start you on setting your path about, what you are passionate about and what you're interested in.
God, yeah. So I guess it just comes down to, once again, like asking yourself, what do you like naturally gravitate
Yeah.
towards? Like what can you focus on? And then in general, I guess just based off experience and reading about like people who have ADHD, they tend to kind of enjoy certain activities or certain professions that allow them to like explore their mind in different ways and give
Yep.
them constant challenges,
Yep.
constant new situations, like project oriented type careers. You know what I mean? Like, again, this is why people who are in entrepreneurship or even like movies, music, anything
Hmm.
like that, people
Very
like,
creative
yeah,
people.
yeah, there's a high level of, like people who have ADHD in those
Yes.
industries, right? So that's pretty
Yes.
interesting. Like tend to fall
But
into
that's
that.
a
Like it,
creativity, creative outlet, right? So they're
yeah.
being able to use that creativity in those types of situations. But Um, but yeah, I think the self-awareness piece is huge. Like really
Self-awareness,
asking
yeah.
yourself what you're good at, what you're interested in, can really kind of can help set you on your way, on your path to success.
Hmm. Okay, and then for the self-awareness, I guess it just comes down to, I guess in your case, trial and error, right? Or is there any other tool that you'd recommend that people look into if they want to gain more self-awareness? Because this can take a long time. It can take
Yeah,
years, to be honest.
yeah, no, self-awareness is a challenge for individuals
Yeah,
with
yeah,
ADHD, and you
yeah.
just have to practice it, and it's just practicing knowing yourself. You can work with a executive function coach can help you with
Hmm.
self-awareness and things like that, and bolstering those executive function skills. So that's a good route for people.
God, yeah, because because like one of the problems with I guess self awareness is like when you have ADHD, like you might have too many interests, right? Right? Because like like your mind tends to get stimulated by multiple different things, right? So with that also happening, you don't really know, I guess, how to choose. It can be really difficult to choose one type of industry because your
Yes.
mind is still interested in many other industries, right? So like that's a huge challenge. But
Yeah.
again, this is why like entrepreneurship, creativity, anything that has that sort of a component that allows you to like explore different aspects of your mind, that tends to be really helpful. Sports as well, because it's constant stimulation, right? But again, I guess.
Well, I would say so. Sports is an interesting one.
Hmm.
So individual sports are better for at least kids and teens and stuff with ADHD than team
Really?
sports, because so team sports like soccer, baseball, basketball, football requires a lot of executive functioning skills. It requires you to know what
I
you're supposed to
hmm.
be doing on the field. It requires you to know what other teammates are doing on the field. It requires you to anticipate what's going to happen on the field. And individuals with ADHD are not as good at that. Individual
Mm.
sports like swimming, track, martial arts, those things are really good for individuals with ADHD because they're competing against, they only have to worry about themselves. They don't have to worry about, what other people are doing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I see. Yeah. Exactly. But then again, I guess it comes down to self awareness. And again, yeah,
Yes.
if you do have those tendencies to kind of really struggle with those like functions that you're talking about, planning, organization, time
Hmm.
management, all
Hmm.
that kind of stuff, it can be kind of annoying, I guess, for the people with ADHD to be in teams. That's pretty interesting. I never actually thought about it like that
Yeah, no,
because.
I
Mhm.
never, I didn't realize that until my son played basketball, and he was not
It's
good.
just
And then
not it,
I found an
eh?
article. I'm like, oh, that explains why he's not good because he didn't know if he was on offense, if he was on defense. He didn't know what he was supposed to
Really?
be doing. Yeah, because there's that requires a lot of like learning, memory, working memory, things like that ADHD individuals struggle with. So his brain it wasn't processing and storing the information correctly, so he could recall it and learn that okay, when I'm over here, I'm in this position. This is the position I'm playing. This is what this position does. So so team sports can be a struggle for individuals with ADHD.
Wow. Okay. I didn't actually know that. I didn't actually know that because like, again, like you'd think it's the opposite because it's again constant stimulation, constant
Yeah.
challenge. But again, if it's too heavy on the functioning aspect of it, when it comes down to stuff that we spoke
On the
about and
working
you're
memory,
yeah,
and yeah, then that's
yeah.
like so like my son competed in track and he was fierce. He was going to beat the guy next to him no matter what. So
That's
yes,
really interesting.
he was
Yeah.
very competitive when it came to that, but track doesn't require you to I'm running, I'm not and I don't have to
Wow.
really know what other people are doing. It's me, I'm running,
Hmm.
it's all
Got it.
about me.
Okay. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
all about
yeah,
me, we're good.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So again, it does come down to the trial and error that you were speaking about, right? Again,
Mhm.
even with
Absolutely.
even with ADHD, they can go in multiple different directions, and you have to kind of figure out, like, I guess, which umbrella that you might lean towards, and kind
Mhm.
of work in that. So I mean, I guess being okay with failure is also extremely important, right? Like, because
Yes.
again, if you're gonna try, you have to fail to kind of figure yourself out, and eventually you'll find yourself in a place where you have that clarity that you're looking for, right? And then everything kind of opens up once you have that
Yes.
clarity. So
Hmm.
yeah. Okay, Dr. Wilcox, this was a great episode. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time here.
Okay.
But yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. This is a really important topic. People talk about it, but like people don't really talk about it in depth, right? So it's not really
Right.
something that's as, I guess, clear to most people. So this was really fun and I really enjoyed this.
Yes,
So
it was
yeah,
excellent. Thank you for having me.
not a problem, not a problem. So obviously, you do a lot of work with ADHD. If people want to go and look into your stuff, where would you go and tell them to go?
Well, they can find me on my blog. It's called Mythbusting ADHD, and it's on Psychology Today. And I'll try to show this in the. I don't know. You
Oh,
can't see it. I
it's
guess
kind of blurring. Oh, there we go.
there you go, because of the background. But
Yeah,
my
I
son
can
and
see
I
it.
wrote a book called Andrew's Awesome Adventures with His ADHD,
That's
and
amazing.
it's it, part of the book is him telling his story. The other part is me telling my story about our experiences with his inattentive type ADHD. So
Hmm.
geared towards middle schoolers, because a lot of kids with inattentive type ADHD are diagnosed in middle school. So yeah, so we like to share our experiences. My son loves to talk about his ADHD.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
so those two things, the book, and then you can find me on Psychology Today. I'm also an executive function coach for a company called To Tame the Shame, so you can look those up if anybody's interested in executive function coaching. We help students, we help adults.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, if you can send me all that, I'll just link it down below, and people
Yeah,
can go and
absolutely.
check it out if they're looking for more information.
Yes, absolutely, I can do that.
Okay. Yeah, no problem, no problem. All right, Dr. Wilcox, thank you so much once again. I really enjoyed this,
Yes,
and yeah, I hope you continue to do what you do because it's important. So thank you
great.
so
Thanks
much.
a lot, Shaq. I really appreciate it.
No problem, no problem. Thank you so much. This is great. Thank you so
All
much.
right,
You have a good day.
thank you. All right, bye.